Let me share with you a little bit of my story before we get into hearing from Josh Berry and from Derek Ford this morning. Who's, just a reminder, we're just taking a little bit of a break. Some of the stuff that Life Church is using right now is kind of like at the movies, and it wasn't available, so we took about a 3-week break, and we'll be back with them starting next Sunday in a new series. And so we're doing stories because stories matter, our stories matter, and stories help us connect. And here at Grace Community, we value relationships. And we know that as we hear people's stories, we'll dive deeper into, it tears down the walls and helps connection help happen better. And so, and we get to know one another better. So glad to hear from these guys today. This last Sunday, not today, last Sunday, I was in Texas, in Texas. The church that I came from invited me back to do some leadership development with their staff. And then I also got to preach, and which was a shock. It was a very last-minute decision, and I got to preach in Big Church, which that doesn't mean anything to you, but I was there for almost 9 years, and I happened to lead a service, but we met in the gym on the south end, and Big Church happened on the north end, and so I was never invited in 8 years to preach Sunday morning Big Church. And I'm pretty sure it took 8 years for my former pastor to forget some things because he introduced me as one of the most exemplary staff members I've ever had. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. You know, you see, you don't even buy it. And I'm like, time heals all wounds. And then he introduced me to the second service as one of his favorite of all time. And I'm like, dude, come on. Yeah, I'll take it, but you know I caused you grief. And so it was a great time being back, and I decided to share some of my story for preaching. And a part of my story, I shared some of the goods that have happened in the last 8 years, some of the struggles I've gone through. One in particular, as you're all very aware of, is going through some financial struggles and how you showed me grace and God showed me grace, and we've been working hard on that and coming out of that. Got an email that afternoon, and this young lady said, hey, can I meet with you tomorrow? So we scheduled a meeting, we sat down, and she just began bawling. And she said, I just want you to know, the only other person in the whole world that knows this is my husband. And because of it, we're struggling. But 2 years ago, I did the same thing. I had spent a whole lot of money that I didn't have for reasons I didn't know. And I'm so ashamed, and I haven't told anybody. And it's caused me to go into a very dark place of depression, and I hate myself, and I need help. And hearing you share your story gave me hope that people wouldn't judge me if I began to share and get help. Stories matter. It gives people permission to take a step. And so I got her connected with another minister on staff, and they are working even this week to start turning things around. For 2 years, she had isolated from her friends and was just living all alone. And this is somebody that I knew, and it just didn't fit. And so we never know what's going to turn us from the person we are to a person we don't want to be. Hopefully today, I believe that hearing these guys' stories will connect with someone in the room and help you take a step toward being the person you want to be and that God wants you to be. I believe that with everything I have. So I'm going to grab this mic stand. Josh Berry, let's welcome Josh up. He's going to share his story.
Anyway, I'm Josh Berry, and happy to be here this morning to share a little bit about my spiritual walk, my walk in the church, which kind of had some missteps at the beginning. My first experience going to church was when I was about 4 years old, and it was actually at preschool. It was a field trip. Our preschool teachers decided to take us on a walk. I think we were misbehaving, or they needed to teach us to be good. And so they took us around the neighborhood. Maybe it was like, I don't know, across the street, but it seemed like quite a field trip to us, walking around with the class to a church. And before we went into the church, the teachers prefaced it with, okay, now, you guys need to be really quiet and really good, because this is God's house. And all of us were kind of in shock, or at least I was, that I was amazed by that God had a house and that it was in our neighborhood. And I'd never been there before. And so that was kind of magical to me and stuck with me. Now, I grew up in a household where my mother had been Catholic. Like she grew up Catholic, but not really practicing. So they were kind of twice a year go to mass Catholics, and my father grew up in a single mom household with two other siblings. And the mother, after my grandfather, who I never met in my life, and he's dead now. Um, he had nothing to do with the family, abandoned the family, and she just didn't really have any room or place for religion. Like it had never really helped her, never really served the family. She pulled her family together by the bootstraps of her own, 2 feet, and she felt that you just needed to work hard and be moral and ethical, and being here in this great country that you'd have opportunities. And my dad, that kind of stuck with my father. So he didn't really feel that there was any need for going to church or teaching your kids about religion. He was never really taught anything, and he was just fine, thank you. So this was my first experience going in preschool, going to a local church. And it would be years later that my mother would start feeling that there was something missing in her life, in her kids' lives. And she, when I was about 8 years old, she started going to the Catholic Church again. And we met some great people there. I started going through the catechism classes and learning about Jesus and learning how to pray properly. And I'm not mocking it because it helped me to focus. And it was something that still to this day I remember some of the things that were taught. But it was my mother sort of going through the motions, if you will. Like she just knew that there was something missing in her life, and she was seeking it in the only way that she knew how. And so my father had nothing to do with that. And it was definitely her with her kids, you know, going pretty early to mass. It was pretty far. She didn't drive, and dad wasn't going to take her in the car. And so we walked quite a distance. It was like a mile and a half to the church. And, it's on Sunday mornings in the winter, it's not a whole lot of fun bundling up the kids early on Sunday. And so, anyway, maybe after a year, we stopped going to church. But soon thereafter, years later, fast forward 6 years, my mother actually through PTA met a Christian and was really moved by her faith, her life, and wanted to know more. My mother was the type of person if someone came door knocking, really didn't want to have anything to do with someone that was just there to try to sell their religion. But she found somebody that was witnessing her faith in her day-to-day life, and that made all the difference. My mother inquired and said, "I want to know more. What's different about you?" And my mother became a Christian. And my mother brought us children to church. Of course, my father still had nothing to do with that. But I was about 12, 13 at the time, and was introduced to the teachings of Jesus. I went to a denomination where the Bible was held in and regarded basically as the Word of God, but like literally like the Word of God in a sense that it almost should be worshiped and revered. And there might not be any of these modern things that you hear about that are miracles. Those aren't really credible and can't really be proven. You need to go back to the Bible. And often you need to go back to our interpretation of the Bible. And so you can kind of see where this could go into an area where you need to have the right knowledge, the right teachings to live your walk your Christian life in a certain way to be able to be a real Christian. And so even though salvation is by Jesus through grace, through faith, I had felt like there was this burden of I need to be able to behave and live a certain way to be able to earn that salvation. And I was willing to follow the straight and narrow, and I felt better than everyone else because of that. I went to college and followed kind of this tradition of this church to my university. Was really active with the college campus, and while my other friends were going to parties drinking, I might go to the party, but I would not drink. Or I wouldn't go to the party, or I made a lot of great decisions in those early, freshman, sophomore year. But I also did things like this, where I was invited, Campus Crusade or InterVarsity Christian. There's some campus ministers that are kind of seeking people that could, want to hear the Word of God. And he asked me, hey, would you like to hear more? I took a pamphlet and I was like, yeah, sure. So I met, and there were 4 or 5 other people, and it was basically like, here's the gospel, this is what it's all about. And I took that as an opportunity to make sure that he knew that he was teaching things the right way. It's completely inappropriate now. I look back on that and cringe to think that I was that arrogant kid that went in and changed everything around to a group of people that were interested in hearing something about the Word of God, and me trying to correct the pastor about, well, what about this? What about that? What does this verse say? And yeah, but at the time, I thought that was completely appropriate because it was important to believe the right things. And if you asked me, like, is that person a Christian? I would have to say, well, they say they are, but I need to find out what they know or what they think, what they feel. And it was a huge burden because I was basically like Christian law enforcement. It was like we were all like trying to make sure that everybody was good and faithful. And although I love my brothers and sisters from this group, they helped me to know the gospel. They helped me to know a lot of truth. But there were also some side things, that were taught and believed. And it's not that everybody necessarily like believed that was absolutely true, but a lot of those teachings would persist, and I think they were really unhelpful, and they were unhelpful to me. And it took years for me to kind of find freedom from that, to realize that, that faith, that our salvation, it is by grace, it's a gift, and it's not by works, and it's something that we can't earn. And so this whole thought that we need to earn that, or that we need to get right, or that we need to, or that we even need to decide who's in and who's out, it's not my job. It was a burden that we don't need to bear. And so it was through experiences, through coworkers. I had a wonderful coworker when I was working in Austin, Texas, and I was looking to change roommates. The situation I was at was pretty far from work, and I wanted a place closer, cheaper, with people that I had more in common with. And he said, "Hey, you know what? You can room with me. I've got an extra room, or I've got an extra bunk. Like he had a bunk bed in his room, and he was willing to share." So I rented with him, and he was part of a interdenominational Christian church, and he was really active with the church. Instead of it just being Sunday morning, maybe Sunday evening, and Wednesday evening type of church, it was you spent a lot of time with people from your church, from your small group. You meet in your homes or apartments. You have pre-meetings and post-meetings, praying for everyone, trying to make sure that everything's prepared, that you're not just kind of winging it every time, but you actually have materials put together. And it was an incredible example of how things could be done differently to me. And it really helped to break my heart and for me to kind of say, you know what, I can part with this without walking away from Christianity. I can actually see that Christianity is so much bigger, that the church, that Christ's church is so much bigger than I imagined, and there's a lot of freedom in that. And I'm preaching to the choir here because everybody here, we go to a church that is grace community, so the importance of community and importance of grace is pretty fundamental, I think. And but it's been quite a journey for me to actually get to that point. Yeah, so thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Josh. And now we're going to have Derek Ford come up and share. We're going to change gears here a little bit. Here comes Derek. No, everybody, welcome Derek to. All right, you good?
I became a Christian at a young age when I was about 5 years old. When I was a teenager, I got called into the pastoral ministry. At that time, I wanted to be a U.S. senator, but God had other plans, and I'm glad I didn't go down that road. So, anyway, I went off to college and then seminary, and in the summer of of 2005, I graduated seminary and got my first church that I pastored. And I was here in Central Illinois. And 6 months after graduation, in January of 2006, I remember, the church was going well. Things were actually putting a new church sign out in front, and stuff was growing and moving there. But I started to get a cough. And so it was a real bad cough. I kind of described it as a coughing fit. Like I'd cough for like a minute or two straight. So anyway, of course, you go to the doctor, no big deal. Give me some of those drugs, and I'll be fine. So I did. I got an antibiotic, and it was about 5 days into that 10-day plan. All of a sudden, huge coughing fit again. So back off to the doctor. Give me another round of antibiotics. They did an X-ray. They said, "Oh, you better take it easy. You're going to get pneumonia." So anyway, I take it easy, take another more potent, strong antibiotic. Later to find out it's like a black box warning. It was so strong, but anyways, strong stuff. Anyway, it was a few days later, and all of a sudden my eyes were bright red. So I go to the eye doctor. They're like, "You have an eye infection." So they gave me some eye drops, and they're like, "You can't wear your contacts anymore." So I said, "All right." So I didn't have glasses. That the prescription was good, so I got new glasses. This was on a Friday. By Sunday, I couldn't even see the back of the church. Like everything was so blurry, I couldn't see anything back there. I'm like, this is weird. These are really bad glasses. Like, man, what kind of prescription did they give me with these things? Still not totally sinking in, but later that night, on Sunday night, I remember having another huge coughing fit. I was actually downstairs in our house, and I remember eventually even getting to the bottom of the stairs and yelling for Corey to help between coughs. So anyway, I went off to the doctor again. First was actually the eye doctor, because what's going on with my vision. And the eye doctor's like, "Whoa, there's some things wrong with you." And it started off with, I'll never forget, you go and you sit down, and they have the eye chart up there, and they ask you to read the eye chart, right? Basic eye doctor stuff. Well, I remember him saying, "Okay, what's it say?" And I'm like, "There's nothing there." And he's like, he's like, "Okay, how about now?" I'm like, "There's nothing there." As I'm covering my right eye, my blurred vision, I never thought of covering one eye. But eventually, I remember the lights turning on and the chair rolling, and never seeing anything on the wall, not even a light. And I'm thinking, okay, his system's broken, or something's wrong, because what's going on here? And then he comes up and he puts his fingers in front of my eyes, and he says, "You just have finger vision. You can't even see anything beyond what's right in front of you. And your left eye, in my right eye, I was 2200, which is legally blind." To when she then proceeds and says, "If it gets any worse, you shouldn't drive." And I'm like, just so you know, I stopped driving way before that. I'm like, I couldn't even see the big signs that said like Mattis and the intersection. So anyway, I was like, okay, this is a little nerve-wracking. And then he goes, "I think I know what's wrong with you." He starts pulling these books off the shelf and going through looking up information. And he goes, "I think you have this. And it's most common in American Indian, Native American women in their 40s. And I'm thinking, okay, Caucasian male 20s, nailed it. But said you needed to go see someone immediately today. And so I went on to a specialist, saw that specialist. I mean, it was like a 7-8 hour eye appointment, taking scans. And the conclusion was, something's wrong. You need to see a doctor to figure out what's going on between your eyes and your cough. So then I called, and we'd only been in the community 6 months. I don't know about you, but that wasn't on my top list of finding a local doctor. So I just always had the on-call. So I remember that morning calling and saying, "I need to see a doctor." "Well, the nurse practitioner is available." "No, I need to see a doctor." They told me, and I went through all the specialists, and I was on the phone for about 15, 20 minutes saying, "You have to pick a primary physician." And I'm like, well, who's taking patients? They knew I'd just say yes, whoever the first one was. They weren't cooperating. But finally, they gave in and let me see the on-call doctor. And I remember going to the waiting room, and I kind of felt like a little bit of a leper. Everyone went to the opposite side because I was coughing again, like nonstop. It's the shortest wait I've ever had. This was pre-mask. I wonder if they actually have those masks there because of me, but no. But yeah, I was right next to the tissue box, just coughing nonstop. And I remember going back and the nurse saying, "We thought it was you again. We heard you back here coughing." And then the doctor came in and checked me out, and I heard him in the hallway talk to the nurse practitioner who saw me the previous week and a half ago or whatever, and said, "What do we do to this guy? He came with a cough, and now he can't see." And I'm like, "Oh, that's comforting. He has no idea what's going on either." So they sent me off to more X-rays, and then they said, "You need to go to the hospital, and on your way, you need to stop here and get a CAT scan." So I do all of that, get a hold of Corey saying, "I'm going to the hospital," while she was at work. I get to the hospital. They check me in. I get into the room that I later find out is actually the hospice wing, which that was comforting. And then they rushed me off to another CT scan. And I remember getting ready to get into the machine, and I was getting ready to lay down, like, "No, the other direction." And I said, "Oh, so the opposite way from this morning." And they're like, "This morning? You already had one of these done today?" I'm like, "Yeah." And then everyone comes, they get in the phone, and all these people come rushing in and everything because they're getting ready to inject me with the IV they give you, and I guess they can't give it to you twice in one day or it shuts your kidneys down. So I kind of learned you just talk. And because, when there's that much going on and that many doctors, sometimes the communication wasn't the best. But anyway, as I came out of that, they then rushed me into my new room for the next week, and that was the isolation room in the ICU. And that is not like it is on TV, by the way. When they come in those spacesuits, you can't hear a word they're saying. There's no microphones. So I'm really glad I didn't see well, so I don't hold a grudge against anyone, because there were some bad experiences of communication back and forth. The one nurse did not put my catheter in right, so that was not fun. It was a very painful time as I was in there. And I remember one of the nurses, though, in there telling me, throughout this time, you really need to look at going to a different hospital. You need to go to Barnes or Chicago because we can't figure out what's going on. During that time in the ICU, they did a surgery to check my lymph nodes because they kept thinking it could be lymphoma. Then the next day, they did a surgery on my lungs to drain fluid. And then the very next day, that day, I woke up and was like, "Feed me." I woke up to surgery like, "Well, the cafeteria is closed." I'm like, "I am starved." The worst thing about surgery leading up to it is you can't drink or eat for 12 hours ahead of time. My goodness, you keep doing that every day? I was starved. Like, give me food. Now, the heart surgery the next day where they drained fluid around my heart, that one I woke up and I didn't want food. But that third surgery took a lot out of me. And it all concluded, I remembered in that room. If any of you remember the 2006 Super Bowl, it was the Pittsburgh Steelers, came back and won at the very end. Well, there's no Super Bowl fans in the hospital that day anyway. They waited to the final drive. No doctor showed up all day until the final drive of the Super Bowl to give me a spinal tap, laying on my stomach with all the new stitches and everything from surgeries. And so Pittsburgh Steelers, I never was a huge fan, but sorry if there's any Pittsburgh Steelers fans. For me, that's spinal tap. That's not fun. So they're definitely not my favorite team. So anyway, they still weren't sure what's going on. And finally, they came up with what they thought was wrong was a thing they called histoplasmosis. Basically, that's fungus in the dirt created from bird droppings. So they think when we put the new church sign in and had to dig in the dirt, I breathed it in. And since I was from Pennsylvania, I don't have the antibodies. If you grew up in Illinois, you get it, you cough, you get better. You don't have to go to the doctor, no big deal. I did not know that Illinois dirt was so poisonous to us East Coasters. But since I didn't have those antibodies, it spread throughout my whole body. So they put me on this antifungal medicine, and my fever broke. I started getting better. They sent me, they were getting ready to send me home, and they were putting like a PICC line in to get medicine, and so it goes in your arm and goes all the way to your heart. And I remember them trying to shove it in and just keep shaking her head and go, "Oops, oops," as they're shoving a line in. And that was also comforting. I learned a lot of things doctors should not say. Anyway, as they were doing that, they couldn't get it in, so they said, "We're going to have to do a more thorough thing the next day." And the next day I woke up, my arm was swelled up, huge, and they found out why they couldn't get it in because there was a blood clot they were trying to push it through. So anyway, fortunately they didn't get it pushed through, and it took another week in a regular room, so I was in the hospital actually about 15 days to get the blood clot, and every day I'd been pacing up and down the hallway saying, "Let me home." And they finally sent me home with that PICC line. I was able to get the IV. For about a month at home, I had it every day. Then they got the results back from the Mayo Clinic that said, "This guy doesn't have histoplasmosis. Stop the medicine." So they stopped the medicine. About 2 weeks later, guess what? The fever, the cough, everything came back. So back to the doctor. Of course, I was there like 3 times a week anyway. So they put me back on the same medicine except in like a liquid form, and it broke, and I got a little bit better. And they did another surgery to try to figure out what was going on. Another just kind of like biopsy of the lymph nodes again, figuring out if that's what's going on. In the meantime, they sent me off to the University of Illinois in Chicago for the cough as well as for my eyes. And the first time I went there, they didn't really find anything out either. And then the second time, it was really interesting. It was kind of like, this was like TV. They had like 2 scopes looking in my eyes, and the doctors argued back and forth with each other to decide who was right and who was wrong about what was going on in my eyes. And they were all deciding who's going to write the next paper on me, basically. But then one doctor finally came in and said, on the second visit, I know what's wrong. I just have to get everyone else to agree with me, and I'm always right. So they'll agree with me. Which, after this has been a 6-7 month journey, it was comforting. Like, someone's taking charge. So anyway, they said, well, we think at least your eyes is a thing called AMPI that's a secondary infection. So we don't know what the primary one was, but the secondary thing is something that happens to males in their 20s. I'm like, hey, that makes sense. So actually, to this day, they still don't know totally what was wrong. They showed I'd been exposed to this fungus, but 99% of the people who get exposed to it develop the antibodies, and I still didn't. So either I'm in the 1% or I had some other kind of weird fungus thing. Because they put me back on the antifungal again, and like I said, permanently the fever went away, and I got better. My eyes, though, were permanently scarred in the macula, which is the detailed center of your vision. If you've heard of macular degeneration, when people get older, it's slowly losing it. I had that like immediately with scars in my macula. So they said I'd never be able to see very well again. Obviously, you can see me standing here. I'm not struggling. They said my brain must have rewired itself because it learned to see around the scars. One doctor did say, he just gave me a new pair of contacts and I could see better. And he goes, okay, this is weird. And he even called it somewhat of a miracle to be able to see with around those scars. Throughout this journey, there's a lot of things, interactions in the hospital. I could spend a lot more time, and I saved you from that. But there was a lot of interactions where people kept saying, you know, are you okay? And I'm like, I'm fine. I'm breathing fine. It's more like, I'm fine. I had no idea half the time how bad I was. I was confident the whole time that God was with me. I was confident that I was going to be okay. I mean, there's a few low points I had to admit when lymphoma was brought up. I had a professor in seminary was diagnosed with that and died within 6 months. And so that scared me. Every time that was off the table, I'm like, I can face this. Just tell me what's going on. So one of the things I learned is, you know, we have scars. I mean, I got scars over from all these surgeries that are very easily seen. The scars in my eyes aren't easily seen unless you get a microscope. And I remember that when I got discharged from the hospital, one of the things that annoyed me the most was a nurse who'd been with me for a week, almost every day, gave me instructions on how to do the blood thinner stuff at home, because I'd give myself a shot every day. And they were like, you have to read this, and then you can go home. And I'm like, I can't read it. And they're like, it's got pictures. I'm like, I know how to read. I can't read it. Like, you've been with me, you know I can't see. And yet there's a lot of people that have hurts and scars that we don't see, and we might say those things. We don't know what kind of impact that makes. Corey and I's adoption journey was another one that left kind of unseen scars on me. We were going to adopt internationally, and then the laws changed, and we couldn't. And so we did some, or at least it made it more challenging. So we went domestic, and after 5 years of waiting, we had 4 different social workers with our agency here in Illinois. Every time a social worker changed, seemed like paperwork got lost. We weren't shown to people we were supposed to. Our agency changed names in the middle of it, and that affected some stuff. We added an agency in the East Coast, and they changed workers, and there was a worker that hadn't, like, she retired after like 25 years or whatever. But it seemed like we kept hitting those changes. And it made a difficult 5-year wait very, very difficult, with a lot of mistakes and things out of our control. People said things that were very hurtful, that knew we were adopting, would say, hey, we'll just sell you our kids. You don't understand, you don't have kids, when they know we've been trying. And those things left scars that were very difficult over that 5 years. And so the thing that I just want to kind of leave you with is, you know, I think we all have scars. Some of them are invisible, like from my adoption journey. We've now been blessed with Addison, Can't imagine having any other child. But we all have scars in our journey. But there's signs of survival. There's signs that God is with us. Jesus doesn't promise us that the road will be easy, but he says, I will be with you always. And that's just what God has shown me over the last, especially I would say 11, 12 years, is that it doesn't matter what it is, God is with us. And to remember that others have scars too, and use your scars to help reach out to them.
Thank you, Derek and Josh, for sharing parts of your story with us. And I've been challenged, and I know many here have. Let's take a moment. We're going to enter into a time of singing again and worship. But before that starts, as the band is getting ready, I'm going to ask everyone, let's not miss this. Let's not get too far past what we've heard. Just close your eyes where you are. And let one of the things or two of the things that were shared in the last few moments really sink in. Whether it's your own scars that you're dealing with, or maybe you've caused some scars. Or whether it's the place you've come from in faith and the place you want to be and the place you're growing to. Ask God to just think one thing deep into your heart today as we connect to these stories of these two men who love God and are working out their faith day by day. We have decisions to make today. We have responses to make to God for who he is and what he's doing, what he's speaking to us about today. Maybe today is the day where you decide to step into being a part of this church, and this becomes a regular place of worship for you. You begin to connect with people and participate in what God is doing through Grace Community Church. Maybe this is the day where you take a step and say, I'm ready to help volunteer and help out. What are the needs? Let me know. I'm ready to take that step in my journey. Maybe today you realize through hearing stories and through things that are going on that you just find yourself on a long drift over the last several months or maybe years, and you realize, I am far from God and I want to come home. And I want to do that. And I encourage you, turn around. God's not gone anywhere. He loves you. He is a good Father. He is right there, arms open wide, and press into him. Come home. Begin to do again the things that you did that kept you close to him at another point in life. He never gives up. Maybe today is the day where you say, I'm stepping over from no faith to faith, from hopeless to hope, from lost to found. And we believe that happens when we say yes to Jesus. And if this is your day, just speak his name, Jesus. Call out, save me, make me new. Change everything. I trust in you. Whatever your decision today, I trust you and God. If you'd like someone to walk with you, to help you process it, to help you take that step, to figure it out, then when we're done today, just write down on a communication card, here's what I've done, here's what I'm feeling, here's what I'm going through. I need some help getting from here to there. Place it in the offering boxes, and we'll be in touch and help you take those next steps. We do serve a good and good Father. This journey isn't easy, right? No promises that it's easy, but we can always press into that he is good and he is for us. And he will go before us, and he will hold us up. And sometimes I think he comes around behind and cleans up the messes too. He's a good God. We can rest in that today, church, whatever we're going through.